Born into the spotlight, yet determined to shine his own light, Julian Lennon, the son of John Lennon, one of music's greatest icons, has lived a life filled with the weight of his father's legendary shadow. Yet he has always sought to be more than just a famous name. From his early childhood, caught in the whirlwind of Beatlemania, to his own music career that captivated fans with heartfelt lyrics and melodies, Julian has continued to reinvent himself as an artist, activist, and author. In this biography, we'll explore the trials, triumphs, and transformation of Julian Lennon. His journey through family complexities, his battles to define his own sound, and his passionate advocacy for environmental causes have created a legacy all his own. This is the story of a man who, despite being born into the music industry, sought to write his own story that was truly his. John Charles Julian Lennon, now Julian Charles John Lennon, officially changed in 2020, was born early on April 8, 1963, at Liverpool Sefton General Hospital. He is the only child born to John Lennon and his first wife, Cynthia Powell. He was named John after his father, Charles in memory of his maternal grandfather, and Julian was a tribute to John Lennon's mother, Julia, who passed away in 1958. His godfather was the Beatles manager Brian Epstein. Cynthia was in labor for more than 24 hours before Julian was born, weighing 6 pounds 11 ounces. Here's a quote from Cynthia Lennon about the birth. John had phoned often over the last few days, and I knew his Aunt Mimi would tell him I'd gone to the hospital when he called again. But it hadn't occurred to me that he should be there at the birth. Having fathers present for the birth just wasn't custom then. The person I wanted was my mom, but she was still in Canada, so I had to go through the birth alone. Unfortunately, the Beatles were on tour at the time, and John didn't see his son until 3 days later on April 11th. At this time, the Beatles had a pretty big following in Liverpool, but not yet an international success. The Beatles manager Brian Epstein, in trying to promote the band, wanted Lennon's marriage and the birth of his son to be kept a secret as to not upset the fans. One time when the news of the wedding leaked out, the group adamantly denied it. With the Beatles just on the cusp of international fame, John was away for long periods of time touring and promoting the group. This was hard for the newly created family. In July of 1964, with the new success, the Beatles manager wanted the group to move closer to Esher near his own home, so Lennon bought a house called Kenwood. It was a mock Tudor-style home on 3 acres of land. It was a short drive from London and was the family home between 1964 and 1968. In an article with The Guardian, a UK newspaper, Julian Lennon spoke about his father and had this to say: "A lot of happy memories of my father were from the late 1960s at Kenwood, the old Tudor house we had in Surrey when I was a little boy. Without knowing it, I probably saw some of the greatest musicians in the world come and go through that house. I remember sitting on the roof of the house with my dad making a balsa wood airplane. There was a great view from up there. As a kid, I thought my dad was pretty happy with the family home, and his place in the world. Who could have predicted that everything was about to change?" The Beatles had just released Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. At the time, my dad had his famous psychedelic Rolls-Royce Phantom 5, which I adored because it had a record player in the back. We also had a Honda monkey bike, a mini motorcycle we used to ride around on. Ringo lived down the road, and my dad would take me to see him on the bike. At Kenwood, my father and I were close. So close, in fact, that though my name is also John, I started to get called Julian or Jules, since my mom would shout, "John, your dinner's ready." Both me and my dad would react. Then suddenly, my dad literally disappeared off the face of the planet. At least that's how it seemed to me. He and Yoko Ono were deeply and publicly in love, and I felt as if my mom and I had been cast aside. Not everyone forgot about us, though. Paul wrote Hey Jules after dropping in to check how my mom and I were doing. Obviously, the title of the song changed to Hey Jude. Maybe 10 years passed during which my dad and I barely spoke. I was very angry about how he left the family. It was thanks to my mom that we started having conversations again. She was such a gentle soul, never vindictive in any way, shape, or form. She always wanted me to have a relationship with him. I was scared the first time I went to visit him in the U.S. after my parents' divorce. I was becoming more aware of the magnitude of this man. Much to my relief, the visit was a success. My dad was charming, funny, and warm. From that trip on, I remember us getting along better. I hesitated to enter the music business because of who my dad was. I would send him the odd cassette of me playing live or song ideas I had recorded on the little Sony Walkman he had given me. He warmly encouraged me to continue playing, but sadly he never got to see my career unfold as he passed away when I was just 17. When I did finally become a professional musician, a few years later, I felt like I understood him better. I try to remember my dad as fondly as possible. I strive for forgiveness and understanding in that area of my life for the difficult times he put my mom and me through. I loved her more than anything, and I can't forget how poorly he treated her. But our relationship was getting better before he died. He was in a happier place. He wanted to reconnect, not just with me, but the rest of his family. He never got a chance to do so. Even now, almost 40 years after he died, I hold my father's memory dear. When he was around 3 years old, Julian brought home a drawing from school that became an inspiration for the band's Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. It was just a bunch of stars, and this blonde girl I knew at school, Julian told Rolling Stone in 1984. Dad said, "What's this?" I said, "It's Lucy in the Sky." And well, you know the rest. In 1968, John Lennon met Yoko Ono, an avant-garde artist, and their relationship quickly developed into a romantic and creative partnership. This affair led to the end of John and Cynthia's marriage. They divorced in November 1968 when Julian was just 5 years old. The divorce had a profound impact on Julian, who was suddenly thrust into a life where his father was largely absent. But Paul wasn't. Julian had this to say about Paul. "Paul and I used to hang out quite a bit, more than Dad and I did. We had a great friendship going, and there seems to be far more pictures of me and Paul playing together at that age than there were pictures of me and my dad." On July 1st, 1969, while on holiday in Scotland with his dad, Yoko, and Yoko's daughter Kyoko, Julian was involved in a car crash. John driving his white British Leyland Austin Maxi near Durness in the Highlands went off the road. Lennon was a notoriously bad driver who had rarely been behind the wheel since passing his test in 1965. He was poor at navigating roads and often failed to notice other traffic. The roads were narrow and the weather was poor, and Lennon panicked after spotting a foreign tourist driving towards him. Lennon lost control of his Austin Maxi, driving it into a roadside ditch. He, Ono, and Kyoko sustained cuts to their face, and Ono's back was injured. They were taken to Gillespie's Lawson Memorial Hospital, where Lennon was given 17 facial stitches, Ono 14 in her forehead, and Kyoko 4. Julian was treated for shock, but otherwise unhurt. He was taken to stay with Lennon's Aunt Mater in Darness, around 50 miles away, before his mother Cynthia could take him back to London the following day. When Cynthia arrived at the hospital, she demanded an explanation from Lennon, but he refused to see her. After the divorce, Julian lived with his mother Cynthia, who did her best to provide a stable upbringing for him. She moved with Julian to a new home in Whole Lake, a quieter suburb of Liverpool. Despite her efforts, the emotional toll of the divorce and the continued absence of his father affected Julian deeply. After her divorce from John Lennon, Cynthia Lennon got remarried to Italian hoteler Roberto Bassanini in 1970, but the marriage was short-lived and they divorced in 1973. Julian's relationship with his dad was distant after the divorce, and he really didn't see him much again until 1973, when he spent some time with his father in California. This period was part of what is often referred to as John Lennon's Lost Weekend, a time when John was separated from Yoko Ono and living with May Pang, his assistant and romantic partner. During this time, Julian Lennon, who was around 10 years old, got to bond with his father. They spent time together doing various activities, including visiting amusement parks and recording studios. Julian has fond memories of this period, as it allowed him to connect with John in a more relaxed and informal setting. John also bought Julian a drum machine for Christmas. This gift was part of John's effort to encourage Julian's interest in music. Julian Lennon played drums on the track Ya Ya from John Lennon's 1974 album Walls and Bridges. This track featured John on piano and vocals and Julian on drums. It was a special inclusion, and John credited it as starring Julian Lennon on drums and Dad on piano and vocals. Julian later remarked that if he had known the recording would have been included on the album, he would have played better. He was only 11 years old. After John Lennon reunited with Yoko Ono in 1975, Julian's visits to his father became less frequent. John and Yoko had their son Sean in October 1975, and John took a step back from the music industry to focus on being a stay-at-home dad. During this period, Julian's interactions with John were limited, partly due to his physical distance and the complexities of John's personal life. In 1976, Cynthia tries a third time with marriage and married English engineer John Twist. But unfortunately, this marriage was short-lived and ended in divorce in 1983. Julian did visit John in New York occasionally and maintained some level of contact. Like on December 24, 1977, Julian visits John in New York to celebrate Christmas festivities. Despite the challenges, Julian has spoken about the positive moments he had shared with his father during these visits. Then, on December 8, 1980, the unthinkable happened. John Lennon was shot to death by Mark David Chapman in front of the Dakota building where he lived with Yoko and their son Sean. Cynthia, unfortunately, was not home when this happened. Julian was home with Cynthia's then husband, John Twist. She asked John not to say anything to Julian as she wanted to tell him the news. But Julian knew something was up with all the reporters and everybody outside. It was complete chaos. But when Cynthia got home, this is what she had to say. Cynthia Lennon, in recounting the events surrounding John Lennon's death, often shared the emotional and challenging experience of breaking the news to their son. Julian was 17 years old when John was murdered and was living with Cynthia in the UK. She knew she had to tell Julian, who was upstairs in their home. This moment was especially difficult, not just because of the nature of the news, but because of the presence of others who were close to the family. Maureen Starkey, the former wife of Ringo Starr, was there with her son Zak, who was Julian's close friend. The two families had a strong bond, and Cynthia knew that Maureen's and Zak's presence would be comforting for Julian. Cynthia carefully broke the news to Julian, who was understandably shocked and heartbroken. It was an incredibly emotional moment, with Julian needing the support of his mother and the comfort of his close friends like Zak and Maureen. Following this, Julian had a transformative period in the 1980s following the death of his father. After his father's death, Julian spent the early 1980s coming to terms with the loss while attempting to carve his own identity apart from his father's legacy. He stayed largely out of the public eyes during these years. He was also inspired by his father's work, leading him to pursue his own music career. Julian made his debut as a musician in 1984 with the album Vlad, which was critically acclaimed and commercially successful. The album included hit singles like Too Late for Goodbyes and Vlad, both of which performed well on the charts. His vocal similarities to his father drew attention, but Julian sought to establish his own artistic identity. Julian was nominated for a Grammy Award for Best New Artist in 1985, which helped solidify his place in the music industry. Julian released his second album, The Secret Value of Daydreaming, in 1986. While it didn't reach the same level of success as Vlad, it produced the top 40 hit Stick Around. By the late 1980s, Julian struggled with the pressures of being compared to his father and the challenges of fame. He became frustrated with the music business and felt disconnected from the commercial side of the industry. During this period, he started distancing himself from the public eye again, though he continued to work on music. In 1989, after his third album, Mr. Jordan, which was less successful than his previous works, Julian began to retreat from the spotlight, feeling disillusioned with the industry. When John Lennon was murdered in 1980, his will left the bulk of his estate to Yoko Ono and their son Sean. Julian was largely left out of the inheritance. According to the reports, John's will only allocated around £100,000, about $135,000 at the time, to Julian, a relatively small sum given the substantial size of Lennon's fortune. The exact reasons for this exclusion are not fully clear, though there are several contributing factors. John was often absent from Julian's life after the divorce from Cynthia. He admitted not being a good father to Julian during this time, and their relationship was distant. After Sean was born in 1975, John became much more involved and a present father, especially after retiring from the music industry for several years in the late 1970s. As John's second wife and manager of his business affairs, Yoko was the primary beneficiary of his estate. She has long been seen as a decisive figure in terms of John's legacy and relationships, particularly regarding Julian. Julian felt he had been unfairly treated and sought legal recourse. In the early 1990s, after years of frustration, Julian initiated a lawsuit against the estate to claim a larger portion of his father's wealth. At this time, John Lennon's estate has grown significantly due to royalties, licensing agreements, and the continuing popularity of his music. In 1996, Julian and Yoko reached a settlement. While the exact terms of the settlement were confidential, estimates suggest Julian received somewhere between $20 million and $25 million. Julian later stated that it wasn't about the money, but about being acknowledged and feeling that his place in his father's life and legacy had been recognized. This was quite insulting, considering the estate was worth about $200 million at the time, and under New York state law, Julian would have been entitled to about 25% of his father's estate. But to add insult to injury, Yoko began auctioning John's possessions after the settlement. This included letters that Julian had written to his father. Julian had to use his settlement money to purchase these letters back. Can you imagine having to use your own inheritance to buy back the letters you had written to your own father? It's quite disgusting. Julian Lennon has had a number of relationships throughout his life, but has never married or had children. He has often cited his complicated relationship with his father as a factor in his reluctance to commit to a long-term partnership. Julian was engaged to Sally Hudson, dated Debbie Boyland, dated Katie Wagner, dated Charlotte Lewis and Fiona, dated Olivia Diabo, dated Tori Spelling, in a long-term relationship with Lucy Bayliss. And that's not even all of them. In the 1990s, Julian Lennon was active in both music and other creative endeavors. He released 2 albums during the decade. Help Yourself, 1991. This was his 4th studio album featuring songs that blended pop and rock with the more mature themes. However, it didn't achieve the same commercial success as his earlier work. Photographic Smile, 1998. After a long hiatus, Julian returned with this album, which was well received by critics. It showed a more reflective side of his artistry, combining rock, pop, and folk elements. Julian has also dabbed in the film production, co-producing documentaries, including Whale Dreamers in 2006, which focuses on indigenous people's spirits connecting to whales and environmental conservation. The White Feather Foundation. Julian founded this charity in 2007 to support environmental and humanitarian causes. The foundation focuses on global sustainability, including clean water access, wildlife preservation, and education for marginalized communities. The name comes from a symbolic white feather that his father John Lennon once spoke as a sign of peace. Julian has become an accomplished photographer, exhibiting his work in galleries around the world. His photography often captures landscapes, portraits, and humanitarian themes. He published a photography book titled Timeless in 2010, showcasing his skills in the visual arts. Everything Changes 2011. This was his most recent studio album, a more introspect and mature work blending pop and acoustic sounds. The album was well received critically, though Julian continues to be selective about releasing music. While not releasing albums as frequently, Julian has collaborated with other artists over the years, including Bono from U2 and Steven Tyler of Aerosmith. Julian has worked with the United Nations on campaigns around sustainability and global environment awareness. On April 1, 2015, Julian Lennon's mother, Cynthia Lennon, passed away after a battle with cancer. Julian shared a heartfelt tribute to his mother following her death. He posted a statement on his website and social media, along with a song he wrote in her memory titled Beautiful. In his statement, Julian expressed deep love and admiration for his mother, acknowledging her strengths and grace throughout her life. He spoke about how she was always a source of support for him, especially during the turbulent times surrounding his father. Julian's message reflected the close bond they shared and how much he cherished her. The song Beautiful was a personal tribute capturing his love for her and the sense of loss he felt. The lyrics described the warmth and light she brought into his life. He also thanked fans for their love and support during that difficult time. Cynthia Lennon had a significant influence on Julian's life, and her death was a profound emotional moment for him. In recent years, Julian has become a successful children's book author. His Touch the Earth trilogy, published between 2017 and 2019, focuses on environmental issues, helping to inspire younger generations to care for the planet. Though less frequent in the media spotlight, Julian has made appearances at Beatle-related events, tributes to his father, and other public engagements. He remains a vocal advocate for peace and environmental causes. In recent years, Julian has balanced his artistic pursuits with his philanthropic work, continuing to raise awareness of global issues while exploring new creative outlets. Julian Lennon's life has been a journey of self-discovery, resilience, and passion. From the son of a music legend to an artist with his own voice, his path has never been an easy one, yet it's been marked with incredible depth and purpose. Through his music, art, and activism, Julian has not only carried forward the Lennon legacy, but also has created one of his own. He has used the platform to advocate for his causes close to his heart, reminding us that the power of creativity goes beyond fame. It can inspire change. As we close this chapter on Julian's life, we are reminded that while he was born into history, he continues to shape the future, both in his art and his dedication to the world around him. This is Julian Lennon, not just the son of a Beatle, but a man with a voice, a vision, and a legacy all his own.